Less than a week before Australians head to the polls, a high-stakes election is taking place in Canada. Voters will head to the ballot box later today. Political analyst Laurie Williams says the deadly car ramming attack in Vancouver will be front of mind for voters.
We're in the midst of a surge in sort of national unity and pride in Canada, and this, I think, has drawn Canadians again closely together in compassion for the victims of this terrible attack. It's detracted attention away from the election for most of us. And again, our hearts across this country are going out to the people who have been affected so terribly by this tragedy.
And as to that vote, what is the feeling in Canada right now?
Well, the polls look like they're tightening nationally. There's still significant enough gaps between the leading party, the Liberals, and the Conservatives in vote-rich areas like Ontario, parts of Quebec, and British Columbia, where it's still looking like the Liberals are strongly in the lead. It could come a little tighter in terms of outcome, depending on voter turnout. Tomorrow, we've had a large turnout at the advance polls, but I think a great many Canadians are seeing this as an extremely important election. They've been engaged in the issues involved in this election throughout the period of the election, and are very, very carefully watching what's happening and looking to the future and what it holds for Canada under these different leaders.
We have heard this line that Trump is the campaign. Now we've seen the trade war play out between Canada and the US, also these threats of making Canada the 51st state. Tell us about the effect that this has had on Canadians and their likely vote.
Well, every time the subject of tariffs or more volatility around the issue of tariffs or comments about Canada being the 51st state, whenever those have hit the news, we've seen a surge in support for Mark Carney, the Liberal leader. The polls show that most Canadians see him as better at dealing with Donald Trump, even better as Prime Minister than Pierre Poilievre, who's the leader of the Conservative Party. When people have focused more on affordability, that distance between the Liberals and the Conservatives has diminished somewhat. But the reality is that Mark Carney is actually more popular than his party, seen as a better prime minister, whereas Pierre Poilievre is seen as less popular than his party and seen as, in some cases, for some voters, he's seen as too closely associated with the populism associated with Donald Trump.
So both leaders really tapping into this nationalism, but kind of in different ways.
Very much. So for Mark Carney, those who are supporting Mark Carney are coming from other parties, and they're doing so because they see him as the stronger leader against Donald Trump, partly because of his experience as former governor of the Bank of Canada and of the Bank of England, his connection to world leaders, his gravitas, his seriousness, his calm in the face of what's increasingly stormy waters is very appealing to many Canadians, and a contrast to Pierre Poilievre. And many voters who would have voted NDP, Bloc Québécois, Green Party, et cetera, have, for the time being at least, been open to loaning their votes to the Liberals in order to ensure that Mark Carney is elected. And many are moved by a disaffection for or aversion to some of the things that are being said by Pierre Poilievre and by those who see Pierre Poilievre as too closely associated with Donald Trump and his ideas.
And there are parallels here in Australia. So we go to the polls in less than a week. The Conservative coalition here has seen a drop in the polls, which, when plotted on a graph, which has been done, it looks very similar to that turning point you saw there in Canada. To what extent did Canada's opposition align itself with those populist trends in American politics? And when it became clear that there may have needed to be a shift, did they do that fast enough?
So there is a bit of an alignment, and some of the messaging has been similar. Canada is broken has been a slogan associated with Pierre Poilievre, and that campaign was working quite well until Donald Trump became President of the United States, and Justin Trudeau stepped down as Prime Minister, and Mark Carney took his place. That combination of effects meant that there had to be a bit of a pivot in the Conservative campaign. Many Conservative critics are saying that the leader needed to pivot and focus more on what's uniquely Canadian about the campaign, focus on a bit more positivity. And some have argued he didn't make that pivot, or if he did, or to the extent that he did, that he made that pivot too late. It's noteworthy that that Pierre Poilievre hasn't lost a lot of votes. It's just that the other parties have, as I said, the supporters of other parties are now supporting the Liberals in order to stop Pierre Poilievre from becoming the leader, in part because they see him as too closely aligned with the populism of Donald Trump.
And what could this result mean for Canada's relationship with the US?
Well, I will say that surge in national unity that I referred to before will, I think, coalesce around whoever the next prime minister is. But even with the support of Canadians, there are limits to what anybody can do in response to Donald Trump. One cannot control his behavior, and certainly both Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney have said that they know that they can't control Donald Trump. What they can do is build on this sense of national unity, start to break down some of the barriers, trade barriers within Canada, to generate economic growth, and to work with other international economic and political partners to try to forge ahead a more stable path for Canada as compared with what we've seen up until this point.